The scorching sun beat down on the rocky hills of Afghanistan as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her position behind the weathered boulder. The desert wind carried the scent of dust and danger across the barren landscape. She had been lying, motionless for 3 hours, watching the valley below through her binoculars. Her camouflage uniform blended perfectly with the brown and tan rocks around her. Maria was not supposed to be here. As a female soldier in 2010, she was officially banned from direct combat roles. But when the Navy SEALs needed the best sniper available for this critical mission, her commanding officer had quietly bent the rules. The Taliban had taken control of a strategic mountain pass, and American supply convoys were being ambushed daily. Something had to be done. The SEAL team of 8 men had accepted her reluctantly. They had heard stories about her incredible shooting skills, but having a woman on such a dangerous mission made them uncomfortable. Team leader Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had made it clear during the briefing that she was there only for long-range support. "Stay back, take the shots we can't make, and don't try to be a hero," he had told her bluntly. Now, as Maria watched the enemy compound through her scope, she could see why this mission was so important. The Taliban fighters had built a sophisticated network of bunkers and firing positions along the mountain ridge. From their elevated position, they could see for miles in every direction. Any American convoy trying to pass through the valley below would be sitting ducks. The plan was simple but dangerous. The SEAL team would approach the compound from the north under cover of darkness, plant explosives on the main weapons cache, and then retreat before dawn. Maria would provide overwatch from a position 800 meters away, using her M24 sniper rifle to eliminate any sentries who might spot the team during their approach. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Maria performed her final equipment check. Her rifle was a precision instrument, capable of hitting targets at distances over 1,000 meters. She had spent countless hours on the shooting range, perfecting her technique. Every breath, every heartbeat, every tiny movement had to be controlled. One small mistake could mean the difference between life and death for her teammates. The radio in her ear crackled softly. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. We're beginning our approach. Count 8 tangos visible in the compound. How's your view?" Maria studied the enemy positions carefully. Through her night vision scope, she could see the Taliban fighters moving around the compound. Most were young men, some barely out of their teens. They carried AK-47 rifles and seemed relaxed, not expecting any trouble. 2 sentries walked slowly along the perimeter, stopping occasionally to light cigarettes. "Alpha Team, I have eyes on all positions. 2 roving sentries, both armed. 6 others in the main compound. I have clear shots on both sentries when you're ready." "Copy that, Overwatch. Hold your fire until we give the signal. We want to get as close as possible before the shooting starts." Maria settled into her shooting position, controlling her breathing and calming her mind. This was what she had trained for her entire military career. Growing up on a ranch in Texas, she had been shooting rifles since she was 8 years old. Her father had taught her that a good marksman wasn't just about having steady hands. It was about having the mental discipline to stay calm under pressure. Through her scope, she watched the SEAL team moving like shadows across the rocky terrain. They were still 400 meters from the compound, but already she could see the incredible skill with which they moved. Each man seemed to know exactly where the others were, communicating through hand signals and moving in perfect coordination. The first sentry was walking directly toward the team's planned route. If he continued his patrol pattern, he would spot them in less than 5 minutes. Maria centered her crosshairs on the man's chest and began to calculate the shot. Distance, 823 meters. Wind speed, 8 miles per hour from the west. Temperature, 72 degrees Fahrenheit, all factors that would affect the bullet's flight path. "Alpha Team, Sentry 1 is heading your way. I can take the shot on your command." "Negative, Overwatch. We'll wait for him to turn around, maintain position." But the sentry didn't turn around. Instead, he stopped and pulled out a pair of binoculars, scanning the area where the SEAL team was hidden. Maria could see him focusing on something suspicious. In a few seconds, he would raise the alarm. Alpha team, he's made you, taking the shot. Wait, we can handle this without... Maria didn't wait for permission. Her finger squeezed the trigger smoothly, and the rifle bucked against her shoulder. The suppressed shot made barely a whisper in the desert night. Through her scope, she watched the sentry crumple to the ground, his binoculars falling beside him. The second sentry heard something and began walking toward his fallen comrade. Maria was already chambering another round. The SEAL team was moving faster now, using the confusion to get closer to their target. Everything depended on maintaining the element of surprise. As the second sentry knelt beside his dead companion and began shouting in Pashto, Maria took her second shot. The man fell silent immediately. The compound was now clear of roving guards, but she could see movement inside the main building. The Taliban fighters inside had heard the shouting and were beginning to investigate. "Good shooting, Overwatch," came Lieutenant Commander Morrison's voice over the radio. "We're 200 meters from target. Keep us covered." Maria smiled grimly in the darkness. Despite their initial doubts, the SEALs were beginning to appreciate having her on the team, but she knew the hardest part of the mission was still ahead. Getting into the compound was one thing, getting out alive would be something else entirely. As she scanned for new threats through her scope, she had no idea that within the next hour, her marksmanship skills would be put to the ultimate test. The SEAL team moved like ghosts through the rocky terrain, using every boulder and depression for cover. Maria watched their progress through her night vision scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger of her M24. The compound ahead was a maze of mud brick buildings and stone walls, perfect for an ambush but also providing plenty of hiding spots for her teammates. Lieutenant Commander Morrison raised his hand, and the team froze. Through her scope, Maria could see what had caught his attention. A third sentry had emerged from the main building, probably sent to check on the two guards who had stopped responding to radio calls. This one was more alert than the others, his rifle held at the ready as he moved cautiously toward the perimeter. "Overwatch, we have a problem." Morrison's voice crackled quietly through the radio. "New Tango just came out of the building. He's heading straight for the bodies." Maria tracked the enemy fighter through her scope. He was young, maybe 19 or 20, with a thick black beard and traditional Afghan clothing. Unlike the other guards, this one moved with purpose and discipline. As he approached the spot where the first sentry had fallen, he knelt down and examined the body carefully. The fighter suddenly stood up and began running back toward the main building, shouting in Pashto. Even from 800 meters away, Maria could tell he had discovered the bullet wound and realized they were under attack. "He's blown our cover," Morrison reported grimly. "All units, prepare for contact." The compound erupted into activity. Lights came on in several buildings, and Maria could see Taliban fighters grabbing weapons and taking defensive positions. Through her scope, she counted at least 12 enemy combatants, far more than the initial intelligence had suggested. "Alpha team, you've got multiple tangos moving to defensive positions," Maria reported calmly. "I count 12 hostiles, possibly more. They're setting up firing positions along the north wall, directly in your path." The SEAL team was caught in the open, still 150 meters from their target. The original plan had called for them to approach undetected, plant the explosives, and leave before anyone knew they were there. Now they were facing a full-scale firefight against superior numbers in unfamiliar terrain. "Overwatch, we need cover. Fire. Can you engage the machine gun position on the north wall?" Maria swung her rifle toward the position Morrison had indicated. A Taliban fighter was setting up a PKM machine gun behind a low stone wall. Once that weapon was operational, it would cut the SEAL team to pieces. The range was extreme, nearly 900 meters, and the target was partially concealed behind cover. She took a deep breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the machine gunner in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall. The PKM fell silent before it could fire a single round. "Target neutralized," Maria reported. "But I've got more movement in the compound. They're organizing a counterattack." The Taliban fighters were indeed getting organized. Maria could see them moving in coordinated groups, using hand signals just like professional soldiers. These weren't untrained village fighters. They were experienced guerrilla warriors who knew how to fight. A group of 4 fighters began moving along the western edge of the compound, clearly attempting to flank the SEAL team. Maria tracked them through her scope, but they were using cover effectively, only exposing themselves for seconds at a time. Alpha team, you've got 4 tangos attempting to flank from the west. I can't get a clear shot. Copy that, Overwatch. We're moving to a better position. But as the SEALs began to move, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the compound. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks, and the crack of bullets splitting the air echoed across the desert. The team dove for cover behind a cluster of large rocks, pinned down by crossfire from at least 3 different positions. "We're trapped," came the voice of Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez over the radio. "They've got us surrounded on 3 sides." Maria could see the desperate situation unfolding below. The SEAL team was caught in a kill zone, with enemy fighters closing in from multiple directions. Their original mission to destroy the weapons cache was now secondary to simply surviving the night. Through her scope, she spotted a Taliban commander directing the attack from behind a thick stone wall. He was pointing and giving orders to the other fighters, coordinating their movements with military precision. Taking him out might disrupt their organization and give the SEALs a chance to escape. But the shot was incredibly difficult. The target was 950 meters away, mostly concealed behind cover, and moving constantly. Maria would have only split seconds. When he exposed himself to communicate with his men, she waited patiently, controlling her breathing and tracking the commander's movement pattern. After 5 minutes of observation, she noticed he had a habit of stepping out from behind the wall every few minutes to point toward the SEAL team's position. The next time he appeared, Maria was ready. Her crosshairs were centered on the exact spot where he would emerge. As soon as his torso became visible, she fired. The bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds before finding its target. The Taliban commander dropped immediately, and Maria could see the confusion this caused among the other fighters. Their coordinated attack began to falter as individual groups lost communication with their leader. "Nice shot, Overwatch," Morrison's voice carried a note of genuine respect. "Their attack pattern is falling apart." But the respite was temporary. Within minutes, another fighter had taken command, and the Taliban assault resumed with renewed intensity. Worse yet, Maria could see reinforcements arriving from other buildings in the compound. The enemy force was growing larger, while her teammates remained trapped and running low on ammunition. "Alpha team, what's your ammunition status?" she asked. "Getting low," Rodriguez replied between bursts of return fire. "We can't sustain this much longer." Maria realized that the situation was about to become critical. The SEAL team was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in an increasingly desperate position. Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters moving closer, preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm her teammates' defenses. It was time to make a decision that would go against everything she had been told about staying back and providing support. If the SEAL team was going to survive, someone would have to create a diversion big enough to allow them to escape, and that someone would have to be willing to take enormous risks to make it happen. The firefight had been raging for 20 minutes, and Maria could see the situation deteriorating rapidly. Through her night vision scope, she watched Taliban fighters advancing on the SEAL team's position from 3 different directions. Her teammates were running out of ammunition and options. "Alpha team, you need to extract now," Maria said into her radio. "You've got at least 20 hostiles converging on your position." "Negative, Overwatch," Lieutenant Commander Morrison replied, his voice strained. "We're completely surrounded. No clear route to extraction point." Maria studied the tactical situation through her scope. The SEALs were trapped behind a cluster of rocks about 200 meters from the main compound. Taliban fighters had established firing positions that covered every possible escape route. Any attempt to move would result in the team being cut down in the open desert. But there was one possibility that might work, if someone could create enough chaos and confusion to draw the enemy's attention away from the trapped SEALs. The problem was that such a diversion would require someone to expose themselves to enormous danger. Maria had been thinking about this moment for the past 10 minutes. Everything in her training told her to stay in position and continue providing long-range support. But her training had never covered a situation where elite Navy SEALs were about to be overrun by superior numbers. She made her decision. Alpha. Team, I'm going to create a diversion. When I start shooting, you move toward the south ridge. That's your extraction route. Negative, Overwatch. Morrison's voice was sharp with command authority. You stay in position. That's an order. With respect, sir, you don't have any other options. I'm moving to a new position where I can engage multiple targets and draw their fire away from you. Before Morrison could respond, Maria was already packing up her rifle and preparing to move. Her current position provided excellent concealment and a clear field of fire, but it was too far away to create the kind of concentrated harassment that would pull the Taliban fighters away from the SEAL team. She had spotted a rocky outcrop, about 400 meters closer to the compound. It would put her within range of multiple enemy positions, but it would also allow her to engage targets rapidly and create the impression of a larger attacking force. The move across open ground was terrifying. Maria had to cover 300 meters of desert terrain with minimal cover, carrying her rifle and ammunition, while enemy fighters were actively searching for threats. She moved in short bursts, using every rock and depression for concealment. Halfway to her new position, a Taliban fighter spotted movement and began firing in her direction. Bullets whined through the air around her as she dove behind a low stone wall. The enemy fighter was shouting to his companions, trying to direct their fire toward her position. Maria didn't hesitate. She rose up from behind the wall, acquired the target through her scope, and fired a single shot. The fighter dropped immediately, but his shouting had alerted the other enemy positions to her presence. Now the race was on. She had to reach her planned firing position before the Taliban could organize a concentrated response. Sprinting across the remaining distance, she reached the rocky outcrop just as automatic weapons fire began raking the area where she had been moments before. The new position was perfect for her plan. From here, she could see into multiple areas of the compound and engage targets rapidly. More importantly, the Taliban fighters would think they were under attack from a different direction, potentially dividing their forces. Maria began her systematic campaign of harassment. Her first target was a group of 3 fighters who had been advancing on the SEAL team's position. 3 quick shots dropped all 3 men, making the Taliban think they were facing multiple snipers. Next, she engaged a machine gun position on the eastern wall of the compound. The gunner had been providing covering fire for the advancing infantry, but a well-placed shot silenced the weapon permanently. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Taliban fighters began turning away from the SEAL team's position to face this new threat. Maria could hear shouting in Pashto as the enemy commander tried to reorganize his forces to deal with attacks from multiple directions. Alpha Team, they're moving away from your position, Maria reported breathlessly. South Ridge is looking clear. We see it, Overwatch, beginning movement to extraction point. But Maria's aggressive tactics had come with a price. Her new position was much more exposed than her original Overwatch point, and the Taliban fighters were beginning to zero in on her location. Bullets struck the rocks around her with increasing accuracy. She continued engaging targets, trying to keep as many enemy fighters focused on her as possible. A group of 4 Taliban fighters had broken away from the main force and were moving directly toward her position. They were using fire and movement tactics, with 2 providing covering fire while the other 2 advanced. Maria engaged the advancing pair first, dropping both with carefully aimed shots. But the other 2 fighters had found good cover positions and were keeping her pinned down with sustained automatic fire. Rock chips flew around her as bullets struck inches from her head. Through her scope, she could see the SEAL team making good progress toward the extraction point. They were moving, quickly but carefully, using the confusion she had created to mask their withdrawal. But they still had 400 meters of open ground to cover before reaching safety. The 2 remaining Taliban fighters advancing on her position were getting closer. Maria could hear them shouting to each other in Pashto, coordinating their final assault on her position. In a few minutes, they would be close enough to overwhelm her with grenades and automatic fire. She had one chance to eliminate them before they could close the distance. Rising from cover, She acquired the first target and fired. The man dropped immediately, but his companion had spotted her muzzle flash and was already returning fire. Maria ducked as bullets shattered the rock where her head had been seconds before. The remaining fighter was less than 50 meters away now, advancing rapidly while firing short bursts to keep her suppressed. She rolled to a new position and came up firing. Her shot caught the Taliban fighter center mass, dropping him just 30 meters from her location. But the concentrated gunfire had attracted attention from the main compound, and she could see more enemy fighters beginning to move in her direction. "Alpha, team, what's your status?" she called into her radio. 200 meters from extraction point, came Morrison's reply. "But we've got more tangos moving to intercept. Can you engage the group moving along the ridge line?" Maria swung her rifle toward the ridge line Morrison had indicated. A group of 6 Taliban fighters was moving quickly along the high ground, clearly attempting to cut off the SEAL team's escape route. They were 700 meters away and moving fast, making them difficult targets. But if they reached their intended position, they would have clear shots at the withdrawing SEALs. Maria had to stop them, even though engaging targets at that range while under fire from multiple directions would test her skills to the absolute limit. Maria's hands moved with practiced precision as she tracked the 6 Taliban fighters racing along the ridgeline. At 700 meters, with enemy fire coming from multiple directions, this would be the most challenging shooting of her military career. Each bullet had to count. The SEAL team's escape depended on stopping these fighters before they could reach their ambush position. She forced herself to ignore the bullets striking rocks around her and focused entirely on her targets. The first fighter was slightly ahead of the others, carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He had to be the priority target. Maria controlled her breathing, calculated the lead angle for the moving target, and squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched the fighter stumble and fall, the RPG launcher clattering down the rocky slope. The remaining 5 fighters immediately dropped for cover, but they were still moving toward the intercept position. 1 tango down. "On the ridge," she reported. 5 still advancing. The Taliban fighters below had pinpointed her position and were concentrating their fire. Maria had to constantly shift positions to avoid the increasingly accurate shooting. A bullet passed so close to her ear that she could feel the heat of its passage. She found a new shooting position behind a thick boulder and acquired her next target. The second fighter on the ridge was using a communications radio, probably calling for reinforcements or coordinating the ambush. Maria's bullet found its mark, and the radio went silent. But time was running out. The remaining 4 fighters on the ridge were less than 200 meters from their intended position, and more Taliban reinforcements were arriving at the compound. Through her scope, Maria could see fighters emerging from buildings she hadn't known were occupied. "Alpha team, you've got major reinforcements arriving at the compound," she warned. "At least 15 more tangos. You need to move faster." "We're moving as fast as we can," Morrison replied grimly. "Still 150 meters from extraction point." Maria engaged the third fighter on the ridge, but her shot went wide as incoming fire forced her to duck behind cover. When she rose to shoot again, all the remaining Taliban fighters had found good concealment among the rocks. She could see occasional movement, but no clear shots. The situation was becoming desperate. Enemy fighters were closing in on her position, from 3 different directions, and she was running low on ammunition. Her rifle held 5 rounds and she had only 2 more magazines remaining, hardly enough to hold off the growing number of attackers. A grenade exploded 20 meters to her left, showering her with rock fragments. The Taliban fighters had moved close enough to use grenades, which meant they would be assaulting her position within minutes. She had to find a way to stop the fighters on the ridge while simultaneously dealing with the immediate threat to her own survival. Through her scope, she spotted movement among the rocks where the ridge fighters had taken cover. One of them was trying to work his way around to a flanking position. Maria tracked his movement carefully, waiting for him to expose himself. When the fighter emerged from behind a large rock, Maria was ready. Her shot dropped him immediately, but the muzzle flash gave away her position to the Taliban fighters advancing from below. Automatic weapons fire erupted from at least 4 different positions, all concentrated on the rocky outcrop where she was hidden. Maria pressed herself against the ground as bullets shattered the rocks above her head. Stone fragments cut her, face and hands, but she ignored the pain and focused on survival. She had to keep fighting. The SEAL team was still 100 meters from safety. Moving to yet another position, she engaged the remaining fighters on the ridge. 2 quick shots eliminated the last 2 Taliban fighters who had been trying to intercept the SEALs. The ridge line was now clear, but enemy fighters from the compound were getting dangerously close to her position. "Ridge is clear," she reported, breathlessly. "But I've got multiple tangos closing on my position. I'm going to have to displace." "Negative, Overwatch," came an unexpected voice. It was Chief Petty Officer Williams, the team's demolitions expert. "We're not leaving you behind. Hold your position. We're coming to get you." "Belay that order," Morrison's voice cut in sharply. "Williams, you continue to extraction point. That's a direct order." But Maria could see through her scope that Williams and 2 other SEALs had broken away from the main group and were moving back toward her position. They were risking their own lives to help her, despite Morrison's orders. The situation was spiraling out of control. The SEAL team was now split into 2 groups, with Williams' group moving toward an increasingly dangerous firefight, while Morrison's group continued toward the extraction point. Maria realized that her attempt to save the team had potentially made things worse by dividing their forces. A Taliban fighter appeared from behind a rock just 40 meters away, firing an AK-47 on full automatic. Maria dove sideways as bullets traced across her previous position. Rolling behind another boulder, she came up shooting and dropped the attacker with a single shot to the chest. But there were more coming. She could hear voices shouting in Pashto from multiple directions, and the sound was getting closer. The enemy fighters were coordinating their final assault, probably planning to rush her position simultaneously from different angles. Maria checked her ammunition. 8 rounds left. In her current magazine plus 2 full magazines. Against the number of attackers closing in, it wouldn't be nearly enough. She needed to make every shot count and find a way to even the odds. Through her scope, she could see Williams and his 2 companions, still 300 meters away, fighting their way through scattered Taliban fighters. They were outnumbered and taking fire from multiple positions, but they kept advancing toward her location. At the same time, Morrison's group was finally approaching the extraction point, where a helicopter would pick them up, but Maria knew they wouldn't leave without the rest of the team. If Williams's group didn't make it to safety, Morrison would bring his people back into the fight, potentially getting everyone killed. The sound of approaching footsteps on loose rock told Maria that the Taliban assault was about to begin. She could hear at least 6 different fighters moving into position around her rocky outcrop. In seconds, they would attack from all sides simultaneously. She had one advantage left: her intimate knowledge of the terrain around her position. During the past hour of fighting, she had memorized every rock, every depression, every possible route of approach. If she could use that knowledge effectively, she might be able to turn the tables on her attackers, but it would require taking risks that went far beyond anything she had been trained for. Maria Santos was about to discover just how far she was willing to go to save her teammates. The attack came from 4 directions simultaneously. Taliban fighters emerged from behind rocks and rushed toward Maria's position, firing their AK-47s on full automatic. She had perhaps 10 seconds before they would overrun her completely. Instead of staying behind cover and trying to pick them off one by one, Maria did something that violated every rule of sniper warfare. She charged. Leaping over the boulder that had been protecting her, she ran directly toward the closest attacker. The sudden aggressive movement caught the Taliban fighter completely off guard. His shots went wide as Maria closed the distance in 3 quick strides and fired point blank into his chest. Without stopping, she spun toward the second attacker, who was trying to bring his rifle to bear on her new position. Her shot took him down before he could fire. But the other 2 fighters were adjusting to her unexpected tactics, and bullets were already zipping past her head. Maria dove behind a low stone wall and immediately rolled to the left as automatic. Fire chewed up the rocks where she had been. Coming up in a new position, she acquired the 3rd fighter and dropped him with a single shot. The 4th fighter had found better cover and was laying down suppressing fire to keep her pinned down. She was down to 5 rounds in her current magazine, but the immediate assault had been broken. More importantly, her aggressive counterattack had disrupted the Taliban fighters' coordination. Instead of the organized assault they had planned, the surviving enemy fighters were now scattered and confused. "Alpha Team, I'm still in the fight," she reported between deep breaths. "Immediate threat neutralized." "Copy that, Overwatch," came Williams' voice. "We're 200 meters from your position and closing fast." Through her scope, Maria could see Williams's group fighting their way through the scattered Taliban positions. They were using classic fire and movement tactics, with one SEAL providing covering fire while the others advanced. But they were still badly outnumbered, and more enemy reinforcements were arriving from the main compound. Maria realized she needed to keep the pressure on the Taliban fighters to prevent them from organizing another coordinated assault. Changing to a fresh magazine, she began engaging targets of opportunity around the compound. Her goal was not necessarily to kill every enemy fighter, but to keep them scattered and prevent them from massing for another attack. A Taliban fighter appeared behind a mud brick wall, trying to set up a machine gun position that would dominate the area where Williams's group was advancing. Maria's bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the weapon crashing to the ground. Another fighter tried to move between cover positions to get a better angle on the advancing SEALs. Maria tracked his movement and fired, just as he reached the halfway point. The man dropped immediately, and his companions decided that staying behind cover was a better option. But the enemy fighters were learning from each engagement. Instead of exposing themselves to her accurate fire, they began using coordinated suppressive fire to keep her pinned down while they maneuvered. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed across the desert as multiple Taliban positions opened. Up on her location, rock fragments flew around Maria as she pressed herself against the ground. The incoming fire was so intense that she couldn't even lift her head to return fire. The Taliban fighters had learned to use the same tactics against her that she had been using against them. During a brief lull in the firing, she heard Williams's voice on the radio. "Overwatch, we're taking heavy fire from the compound. Can you suppress the position on the northeast wall?" Maria risked a quick look through her scope toward the position Williams had indicated. A Taliban fighter with an RPK light machine gun was laying down devastating fire on the advancing SEALs. The weapon's sustained fire capability made it extremely dangerous to anyone caught in the open. But engaging that target would require Maria to expose herself to fire from at least 3 other enemy positions. The Taliban fighters were clearly expecting her to try to help her teammates, and they had positioned themselves to catch her in a crossfire. She made the decision anyway. Rolling to a new position, Maria acquired the machine gunner and fired. Her shot was perfect, dropping the fighter immediately and silencing the dangerous weapon. But as expected, her muzzle flash drew immediate fire from the other Taliban positions. Bullets struck all around her as she dove for cover. One round passed so close that it tore through the fabric of her uniform sleeve without touching skin. She was rapidly running out of safe positions among the rocks. "Machine gun position neutralized," she reported, "but I'm taking heavy fire from multiple positions." "Hold on, Overwatch," Williams replied. "We're almost there." Through her scope, Maria could see Williams's group was now only 150 meters away, but they were pinned down by accurate fire from at least 6 Taliban positions. The enemy fighters had recovered from their initial confusion and were once again fighting with disciplined tactics. Worse yet, she could see more reinforcements arriving from distant buildings in the compound. The Taliban force was growing larger, while her ammunition continued to dwindle. She was down to her last magazine, 20 rounds to hold off an unknown number of attackers. A new voice crackled through her radio, Morrison's voice from the extraction point. "All units, we have helicopter support inbound. ETA 4 minutes. Air support would change everything, but 4 minutes might as well be 4 hours in their current situation." Maria could see Taliban fighters beginning to move into final assault, positions around both her location and Williams's pinned-down group. The enemy fighters had learned from their previous failed assault. This time they were taking their time, using covering fire and coordinated movement to get into position. When they attacked, it would be with overwhelming force from multiple directions simultaneously. Maria realized that she had perhaps 2, minutes before the final Taliban assault began. 2 minutes to find a way to keep both herself and Williams' group alive long enough for the helicopter to arrive. With limited ammunition and multiple enemy positions to cover, it seemed like an impossible task. But as she watched the Taliban fighters moving into their final positions, an idea began to form. It was extremely dangerous and would require perfect timing, but it might be their only chance. The plan would require her to abandon the defensive tactics that had kept her alive so far, and once again take the initiative in the most aggressive way possible. Maria Santos was about to attempt something that would either save all their lives or get them all killed in the next few minutes. Maria could hear the distinctive sound of rotor blades in the distance. The rescue helicopter was approaching, but she also could see Taliban fighters moving into final assault positions around both her location and where Williams's group was pinned down. The next 2 minutes would determine whether any of them lived to see the helicopter. Her plan was simple but extremely dangerous. Instead of waiting for the Taliban to attack, she would create maximum chaos by engaging as many targets as possible, in rapid succession. The goal was not to eliminate every enemy fighter. She didn't have enough ammunition for that, but to disrupt their coordination enough to buy time for the helicopter to arrive. The key was timing. She had to wait until the Taliban fighters were committed to their final positions, but before they could begin their coordinated assault. Too early, and they would simply find new cover. Too late, and Williams's group would be overrun. Through her scope, she watched him,